Hey you guys, welcome back to Tomes of Terror, my little book review series. So, if you've been watching these for any amount of time, you will probably remember that I had read and reviewed a couple of novels by Ania Ahlborn before. Those two being The Devil Crept In from 2017 and If You See Her from 2019, which I think was actually the first book that I actually reviewed for this whole series. Now, if you remember, I actually really enjoyed both of those books. Enjoyed them enough that I wanted to read another one of hers when it pops up in my Kindle Unlimited recommendations. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Ania Ahlborn, she's quite a popular and also award-nominated author, horror writer she was actually born in Poland, but she went to college in the United States in New Mexico and now lives there in New Mexico. And she actually first came to the attention of horror readers, the horror community, when her self-published debut novel, which is called Seed, became the #1 best-selling horror novel on Amazon and was subsequently optioned for film by Amazon Studios back in 2012. That's when the book came out. I don't think they've made the film yet, or if they're still planning to. I think actually it was kind of a big deal at the time because it was the first original novel, if I'm not mistaken, the first original novel that Amazon Studios had optioned. But like I said, I don't know if they've actually made the movie yet. It doesn't appear that they have. So the book I'm talking about today is called The Shuddering, and that came out in 2013. And it is every bit as well written, fast paced, and as entertaining as the other two books of hers that I've read. And what this one is essentially just like a very simple, very straightforward, people trapped in an isolated cabin getting terrorized by creatures from the woods type of story. So if you like those kind of just, again, very straightforward kind of stories, then you'll probably like this one as well. It's very gruesome. Like it has like a lot of gore, a lot of people getting torn apart and eaten and things like that. There also is a lot of character drama that I don't know. I'll kind of get into that a little bit because I think that was kind of a sticking point with some people that didn't love the book. But I think it made like the deaths that do happen in the book like a lot more impactful. So if you like stuff like that, then you will probably really dig this as well. Now, at the beginning of the story, there's kind of this prologue, like a short little chapter or whatever, in which there's like an older guy, I think he's like retirement age, like 65 or whatever, and he lives in this remote mountain cabin with his wife, and he's out gathering wood and ends up falling victim to essentially like a pack of these horrifying looking monsters who just tear him limb from limb and eat him. So right from the very beginning, we know there's something out there in the woods, and periodically throughout the main plot of the book, you kind of get these interspersed scenes of other characters that we don't really know, kind of cannon fodder type of characters who are getting attacked and devoured by these creatures. So in that way, the novel is structured a lot like a horror movie, where we occasionally kind of like cut away from the main action to remind the reader that the threat is like getting closer and the core characters really don't know what's going on. So it kind of like ups the suspense. So after that, we're introduced to most of our kind of main protagonists. Now, these are a set of very close-knit twins whose names are Jane and Ryan. And then we also have Jane's best friend, whose name is Lauren, and Ryan's very good girl, a very heroic husky named Una. Spoiler alert. The dog does die, but thankfully it's implied rather than graphically described. So it didn't bother. I mean, it bothered me obviously, but I was like, well, at least she didn't like roll around it, because you guys know how I feel about like killing like cute animals in books. So it's like, I know you have to do it sometimes to like up the horror, but it's like you don't have to like wallow in it, you know what I mean? So I'm glad it didn't do that. So this gang here is driving up to Jane and Ryan's parents' cabin, which is essentially more of this big lavish like mountain chateau mansion type situation, and it's up in the mountains of Colorado. And what they're doing is they're getting together. There's one last get together before like all of these big changes happen, like in a bunch of their lives. So Jane is a second grade teacher, I think it's second grade, yeah, who is actually like, I mean, obviously the twins are from a very wealthy family, a family that can afford this big mansion out in the, for a second home or whatever. So she's actually kind of always been a little bit embarrassed about the wealth that her family, and she doesn't really like to take money from them. It's like sometimes she'll take money from her brother, like if she really needs it for rent or some shit, but she is very much, I kind of want to make my own way, and I don't really want to lean on them for anything. Now, she's just divorced her husband, Alex, who cheated on her, and she's kind of trying to put her life back together. They weren't married that long. I think it was only like 4 years or something like that. Now, Ryan, her twin brother, is this very, like, stereotypically handsome, very charming, very confident. He's kind of like, I guess, a winter sports celebrity type guy. He made a fortune writing and reviewing like ski slopes, I think, like around the world. Like he has a really popular website, and he has like all these corporate sponsorships, and he's just like rolling in loot. And he's, like I said, he's kind of famous like in certain circles. And he's got this big deal, and he's going to be moving to Zurich in Switzerland shortly. So he kind of wants to reconnect with all his friends and family, because this is kind of going to be their last big weekend together, and he's going to be leaving the country. Also, unbeknownst to Jane, because Ryan hasn't told her, Ryan has actually sold this family cabin. Now, he and Jane spent a lot of time growing up there as children. Like every season they would go up there, and she really loved it. We never actually do get to meet Jane and Ryan's parents, but neither twin really has much good to say about them, particularly their dad. Apparently the dad like cheated on their mom like all the time, and lately has been sort of gallivanting around the globe with his much younger model girlfriend who's like an Italian or something, and hasn't really talked to them or, you know, made any contact with them or anything like that. And, you know, they're a little bit bitter about it, Ryan especially. Now, also invited up to this kind of last hurrah, which I think is going to be like a 4-day weekend, is Sawyer. Now, Sawyer is Ryan's best friend since they were all teenagers, and also Jane's first love, and she's never really gotten over him. She hasn't seen him in a few years. I think she invited him to her wedding, but like he didn't show up, and so she doesn't really know like where she stands on the situation. And she's kind of apprehensive about spending time around him again, though she's pretty sure she can keep it together. She's been kind of like thinking about it. Her brother keeps going, "Are you all right with this? You know, I can tell him not to come if you're going to be weird." And she's like, no, it's fine. Now, she does know it's going to be difficult, especially since at the last minute, Sawyer decided that he was going to bring his girlfriend, April, who none of the other people have met before. One of the reasons that Jane brought her best friend, Lauren, in fact, was to kind of serve as a sort of like security blanket, like in case she couldn't handle seeing Sawyer with another woman. Oh, and she also brought Lauren. I mean, she brought her because she's her best friend too, but I mean, she also had some like ulterior motives, I guess. Like not in a nefarious way, but you know what I mean. But she also brought Lauren because she thought that her commitment phobic brother, Ryan, would be really into her. And she thinks it's about time, because Ryan's kind of one of those playboy type, you know, oh, I don't really want to get married. I don't really want a commitment. It's like, you know, he dates all these beautiful girls, but he's kind of like afraid of commitment. So she's like, well, it's about time he like settled down with a nice girl or whatever. And she thinks that him and Lauren will get along. So that was kind of like another motivation for her bringing Lauren too. Ryan, it should be noted, also had some little sneaky purposes of his own, inviting Sawyer in the hopes that Jane and Sawyer would get back together, but then kind of having those hopes dashed when Sawyer was like, oh, by the way, I'm bringing April, this girl that none of you guys know, even though all of them have been friends for a really long time. I realize that when I kind of say it all out loud like that, like when I laid it all out, it does kind of sound like a reality show. But as I mentioned, there is a lot of drama like going on with the characters, but I thought personally that it lent a lot of depth to the story and kind of upped the stakes substantially, because the people going through the horror seem like actual people and not like cardboard cutouts. But I did read a handful of reviews that sort of lamented that, oh, I couldn't connect with these characters, or I don't like them all that much. So your mileage may totally vary on that. Some of the characters are more likable than others, but they did all seem like kind of regular, flawed, mostly relatable people, albeit largely people with way more money than I'll ever see in my entire lifetime. So there is that. But they're not like jerks or anything. Well, I mean, some of them were kind of jerks, but not like to the point where they're unlikable, at least in my opinion. So when Sawyer and April arrive, they're a little bit late because they got lost. It's even more awkward than anyone really anticipated, though everybody kind of tries to make the best of it, at least at first. April turns out to be this kind of sour goth chick who isn't really into snowboarding, which they all kind of came up there to do, and doesn't really like the yuppies that her boyfriend used to hang with. Not gonna lie, I can kind of sympathize with that situation. Also, she pretty much immediately twigs on to the fact that Jane is still into Sawyer, her boyfriend, and that Sawyer may be kind of returns those feelings. So as a result, she doesn't really make much effort to try to ingratiate herself with the others and comes off like pretty surly and a little bit passive aggressive to the rest of them. She does get more sympathetic as the story goes on, but at first you're kind of seeing her through the eyes of everyone else, and they really don't like her very much at all for various different reasons. So while all of this drama is going on, little things start happening like out in the woods. Some of them hear kind of strange noises out there in the middle of the night and see the trees shuddering, hence the title. At first, they kind of attribute this to, maybe it's wolves or maybe it's elk or something like that. It is kind of like out in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. After all, the forest is full of animals. Una the dog, though, seems really uneasy. She's kind of like scared to go outside. And at one point, she even like snaps at Jane, which she's never done before. And every now and then, like one of the group will kind of see like a shadow moving around like behind the trees or just outside the windows that looks too big to be an elk or a wolf. Then a bit later on, the gang find this big smear of what appears to be blood in the snow not too far from the cabin. Now, they don't see a body, like, not a human body or an animal body or anything, so they assume, oh, maybe it was just roadkill or it was a predator that dragged off a deer or something like that. But even more ominously, April, who actually, when they went snowboarding, she was like, fuck this shit, and like stayed in the lodge. She overheard like a couple of guys talking about like this search and rescue who had found a dead guy up there like last season. So all these little things are going on, and meanwhile, we, as the reader, know that the monsters are out there because every now and then we witness some hapless skiers or some tow truck drivers or something like that get eviscerated by these same monsters. Now, the origins of the monsters themselves are never really explained all that heavily, which I think was probably a good idea, but they don't appear to be supernatural in any way. I guess they kind of have maybe a slight resemblance to a Wendigo, but it's not really, there's no like mythology or folklore or anything like that about them, because like I said, it's kind of like from these people's point of view, and they don't know what the animals are. The animals are kind of like described, they're very, very tall and they're very, very thin, like emaciated looking. They have really long, spindly limbs. They can climb, they can run, they're really fast. They have like really, really big, huge teeth, like these creepy, like black eyes, and they're really, really super strong. And they're also like really cunning, really intelligent, and they seem to have something of like kind of maybe a social structure or like some kind of hierarchy within their pack, like they're pack hunters. It's implied that they've always lived in the woods here, but have only recently started attacking humans because other food sources have maybe become scarce. So they're kind of like coming out because maybe they're starving. But like I said, they're not described as like supernatural in any way, even though they're clearly monsters. So the main characters at the fancy cabin don't actually even see the monsters full on until about 2/3 of the way into the story. Although, like I said, you have seen other people like around the area, like getting picked off one by one, like as the monsters kind of get closer to the cabin. So there's been like a horrible blizzard, which snows the gang in. And at the same time, Sawyer and April have this really terrible argument after April confronts Sawyer about the obvious torch that he's still carrying for Jane. Which, like I said, she's kind of a dick about it, but she's not wrong. You know what I mean? So she gets real emotional. She's really, really mad, really furious. So she insists, look, me and Sawyer are leaving, but there's a blizzard and the Jeep gets stuck in a snowbank. At which point, April, who's just altogether through with all of this shit and doesn't like any of these people and wish she hadn't come, kind of stomps off into the storm, which obligates, some of the gang to go off looking for her, at which point the monster attack sort of begins in earnest and they get their first, like, good look at it. So the final third of the book is just this real tense, like, nail-biting kind of survival epic. Characters get killed, characters get like horribly wounded, the power goes out, like the food stores start running low because they didn't have a fuck ton of food there to start with, and the remaining holdouts kind of have to figure out a way to get off this sort of like snow-choked mountain and back to civilization, like before they all become essentially monster chow. So if you're a fan of like real grisly, kind of fairly uncomplicated monster stories that are sort of like set in isolated in the dead of winter at a remote cabin in the woods, then this should be right up your alley. Though keep in mind that there is a great deal of character building and interpersonal drama. So how you feel about that will likely impact your overall enjoyment of the book as a whole. I actually found all the character interactions and all of the turmoil and stuff pretty compelling. And it did make the story a lot more poignant for me, as I got like genuinely upset when some of the characters died, just because, you know, I had spent so much time inside their heads and like knew what their kind of like future hopes and dreams were and what their anxieties were. And now like none of this stuff is ever going to come to fruition because like an animal was hungry and just like wanted to eat them and stuff like that. Again, though, your mileage may vary. Other than that caveat about, you know, there is a lot of interpersonal drama in it, I would absolutely recommend this to anybody who is into like gory creature features or survival horror or cabin in the woods type stories. This is a really good one. Like I said, it's very well written. It's very action packed and fast paced. It's got a lot of gore, although most of the gore is toward the end, but you know, and there is like a lot of character depth in it as well. So I quite enjoyed it, and I will probably be reading some more of Ania Ahlborn stuff because this is the third book of hers that I've read, and I've actually liked them all. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.